There's a really important cultural dynamic playing out, political dynamic playing out as well across the country right now that you're not hearing very much about, that I want to spend some time talking to you about today. And it has to do with the polarization of states, right? Where we increasingly now have states that are single party strongholds. We'll talk more about California later on in the show today. But there are these states out there where they've decided that they're just going to forget about the fact that they have many, right, a large percentage of residents who would not agree with a certain action. They're going to enact deeply progressive left-wing policies where they can. And you've seen a little bit of this in red strongholds recently, but really just around some issues like trying to restrict abortion, which would be a good thing for humanity, but nonetheless, there have been these efforts that are ramping up. Seeing them particularly in a lot of these blue states, because you've had, over the last 3 years while Trump's in office, 400 state lawmaker seats that were held by Republicans have gone to Democrats. So this also occurred, I would have you remember, this occurred during the Obama years in the other direction, where Obama, he was very popular and he did very well as president, of course, won 8 years in office. Very popular with Democrats, not very popular with Republicans, but he won big electoral victories both times around. But what people forget is that he also presided over a Democrat party that lost power in Congress, and he lost control of the House. The Tea Party wave in 2010, then lost control later on. The Democrats lost control of the Senate, and all along there were enormous losses, having to do with the state legislatures, where Republicans were in control of the state legislatures. Now, this is very, very important for a whole bunch of reasons. One of them, though, I wanted to get this out right away, is that in 2020, there'll be many states that are up for their redistricting. They determine what the congressional districts are. Now, Democrats, as they tend to do, have been fighting this when they don't like the outcome. When they don't like the outcome, the process is suspect. When they do like the outcome, the process is sacrosanct. That's how they approach everything, right? But it's certainly the case with districting and redistricting, or I keep using those two words, meaning the same thing. There have been some court challenges. Virginia is a very good example of this, where they say, sorry, you're not allowed to do that in this way in this district. It's too favorable for the side that I don't like. That's the only real standard. Because any congressional district is inherent. It's like drawing the borders of a country on a map. What should the border between the U.S. and Canada really be? Well, kind of just some people in charge had a map, and they drew a line on a map, and that's kind of what happens. That's it. There's no... Yeah, sometimes you have some natural barriers. The Atlantic Ocean, the Pacific Ocean, those are our borders with Europe and Asia, respectively. I mean, there's something. The Rio Grande is kind of a border, but not really. You have some areas where there's a natural border, but usually it's just lines on a map. That's true of congressional districts. And so what you have now are Democrats who are very upset, and they keep saying that it's cheating, it's unfair, because Republicans have drawn districts that are more favorable to their, political prospects than, I guess, what the Democrats would want. By the way, we all know that everyone who complains about that now, and any judge who, even in a state like Virginia, would overrule that, as has happened, they do that. And I think we all know that if it were advantaging Democrats and disadvantaging Republicans, then all of a sudden the districts are fine, no problem. Hey, what are you going to do? It's all kind of subjective. This is what the root, the foundation of liberalism today is hypocrisy and double standard, right? Those are the twin pillars of contemporary Democrat liberalism, socialism, hypocrisy, and double standards all across the board. But the Democrats have flipped 8 legislative chambers just since 2018, and they have both chambers in 19 states. Virginia is the most, most sort of battleground focused one, because Virginia is a state where there's a lot of Republicans and a lot of Democrats. It's a purple state that I think, unfortunately, is now I think Virginia is a blue state for presidential election purposes. And I don't think it's going to change anytime soon. It's really become dominated by the expansion of D.C. suburbs, notably Arlington, Virginia, and Loudoun County, and all these other counties that are in Virginia that are very, very wealthy, by the way. But these different Fairfax County, they've become huge population centers, and they have a big sway on Virginia going blue. And so now they're trying to push all this legislation through where they want to, they call it expanding voting access, which is always a very vague. Why do they call it expanding voting access? Because, I mean, you should either be able to vote or you shouldn't be able to vote. How are they expanding voting access? Oh, we'll get into some of this. Putting in state protections for abortion rights. Keep in mind, I think it was Jeffrey Toobin, who is CNN's chief legal analyst, who is a garbage legal analyst. I mean, not good. You would not want this guy. You would rather, if you were being held in a prison in Alabama for a murder you did not commit, you would rather not just have my cousin Vinny. You'd rather actually have Joe Pesci, all 5'2" of him, defending your rights and trying to keep you out of prison than I think you would have Jeffrey Toobin. Jeffrey Toobin had some tweet that after Kavanaugh was confirmed, he tweeted out that abortion will be illegal in like a dozen states or something within 18 months. And it was 18 months last month, and abortion is illegal statewide in 0 states. But other than that, great prediction, Jeffrey Toobin. But Democrats are showing us what the plan is here, which is that if there is any reduction in the absolutist right to abortion, remember, abortion is not just a very important right to Democrats, because also if you ever start to move away from, I mean, they inherently have to believe that abortion is a good thing. Now they say that it's not. They want it safe, legal, and rare. They've tried that in the past, but the public admission through law that you want less abortion, even though about 70 to 80% of the population, depending on the poll you're talking about, opposes late-term abortion. They understand there's some problems in some abortion procedures. If that is ever enshrined in laws, if there are limitations, restrictions on abortion at the state level, if some states say, sorry, we think this is unethical and this is immoral, then you would have a circumstance where Democrats would have to come face to face with, they think that there can be a right to do something that is bad. Find me another right to do something that is bad, that is immoral, you have a right to do something that is immoral and bad and wrong. And not like subjectively bad as in, speech can be mean and offensive. No. I mean, you have a right to do something that is a wrong. It can never be right to do a wrong. It's actually one of the preferred sayings from my old mentor at Amherst, Professor Hadley Arkes. He used to say that all the time. He was right, by the way. But Democrats are showing us what the plan is, which is to protect abortion across the board in as many states as possible. And they protect it as an absolutist right. There's special, you can't even, stand in the doorway of an abortion clinic and try to pass out literature against it. There's all these things. It's this, they create all this additional legislation and regulation so that abortion access, they call it now, becomes so. And they say abortion is health care, so really it should be paid for by the state, which means you should pay for it. This is a right that now exists, they say, that cannot be restricted, that you should pay. Forget the Hyde Amendment. They've abandoned that. I mean, they've become extremists on abortion, even compared to where they were 20 years ago, 10 years ago. Now they're like, nope, not only should you should have to pay for it, the government should fund it, and you should have no say in this. You cannot try to, stand in the way, the doorway of an abortion clinic. And, oh, by the way, if an illegal alien comes into the country, that person's abortion should be paid for with taxpayer dollars, too. That's where we are. So states are now trying to make sure they already have legislation in place in case Trump judges are in fact, the difference maker here. And I say this, and I've had people kind of push back on this, conservatives, when I brought it up with them, but for all of Trump's imperfections and his personal failings, I think you could say, in his personal life, which I know, again, look, it's fair game, but it's also, you don't want to be too harsh on this stuff. But for all of that, how would we judge it? Speaking of judge, kind of a sloppy transition here, but this president Trump is better on judges than any Republican president in my lifetime. I think you could argue probably any Republican president for as long as we've had the political issues at hand that we do. So, I mean, you go back a couple of generations. He's the best Republican president for the appointment of Supreme Court judges in 100 years, easily. I mean, I don't know if you want to go before that, but it was kind of different stuff. So, he's unbelievable. I mean, he's been fantastic with the federal judges he's appointed, and Mitch McConnell, give him credit too. Cocaine Mitch getting the job done. He's putting people into positions, lifetime positions, appointments across the federal judiciary that's going to have a really major impact for a very long time. And, Trump has been excellent on these judges. If, in fact, another opening comes up in the next, assuming Trump wins re-election, which we know we're not counting our chickens before they hatch here. Assuming Trump wins the next election, though, and he manages to appoint someone along the lines of a Gorsuch or a Kavanaugh, although we don't know how conservative and constitutionalist Kavanaugh really is yet. We don't know. We know he didn't run a secret gang rape ring back in the day, unless you're a total lunatic and a moron who believes that still. But, we don't know how good he is on some of these issues. But if Trump's election and his appointment results in a change in abortion law at the Supreme Court level, and that then means that it becomes a state's issue, which is what these states are all doing to prepare for it, meaning that the blue legislatures, even in states like Virginia that are kind of purple, right? The California is a separate issue where it's just blue and there's no hope of changing anytime soon. We'll talk about that later. But in Virginia, where it's a purple state, trending blue, they're trying to put these laws in place while they can. This is kind of like what the Democrats did with Obamacare. Oh, we have a kind of an anomaly here. We have control everywhere. Just forget about the other side. Just do it. Just do it to them. Just ram your progressivism down their throats. But on abortion specifically, they're preparing for this because if Trump's judges do anything that restricts abortion or just no longer has this writ from on high of the Supreme Court that abortion is the law of the land and there can be no state restrictions on it, and Planned Parenthood v. Casey is really where this could happen, where you have the special category of abortion in our law. The Roe v. Wade decision is a horrible decision, but just based on the legal aspects of it, never mind the moral. But then you look at Planned Parenthood v. Casey, where you added all of this. Now abortion is a right that must be protected along the lines of how people think of, voting rights. It's not just you have a right to be able to vote, but, it's like, well, you can't have a polling place move from here to there. And there's all these other things that get added into it to make it a right that is an effective right. So if you have some of those restrictions that come as a result of a change from the Supreme Court because of Trump judges, and this is what I'm really trying to get to here, but no one really thinks of it this way. How many lives will Trump have saved? How many lives will Donald Trump be directly responsible for saving if the judges that he appoints, specifically judges that he has appointed to the Supreme Court, are the deciding factor in rolling back the current regime of abortion in this country, such that not every state will, of course, outlaw it. Some states California will have it exactly as it is right now. But there will be states where it's still practiced, where all of a sudden it will be in doubt or perhaps be eliminated entirely. How many lives will he be responsible for saving? I think that's a very real calculation that we should keep in mind as the president. People say, oh, my judges, this is the line you'll hear. Like conservatives and, evangelicals, for example, have been getting so much heat recently because they overwhelmingly, I think 80 to 90% of them support Donald Trump. And people say, oh, well, that's so hypocritical because evangelicals are supposed to care about character and they're supposed to care about, this and the other thing. And to that, I just say, well, hold on a second. Evangelicals care about the President of the United States defending their interests, their rights, and pushing moral policy. And, I take it in the other direction. I say Catholics that support people like Nancy Pelosi. As a Catholic, which is what she loves to say, of course, even though she's pushing for the policies that I think would make Beelzebub grin. I don't know how Catholics are okay with the stuff the Democratic Party's doing and still consider themselves to be in any reasonable or any meaningful way believing Catholic. So that's a part of this. But then there's the issue of guns, which I wanted to transition us to. Virginia is a state that I've spent a lot of time in. I have family still in Virginia, and I used to spend one or two major holidays a year. Usually it was either Thanksgiving or 4th of July, or both, in Virginia, seeing my grandmother down there. And, we've always had this connection to Virginia as a family as a result. And, meaning my immediate family. And, we think of it as the South, and obviously you go back and, the history of this country, it clearly, Richmond's role in the South and everything. We're very aware of Virginia as the South, but, it's starting to feel a lot less like the South in the sense that it's gone bluer and bluer in recent years. And that's where you have the situation now. And this is, by the way, also why I talk about hypocrisy and the way the Democrats will abandon principles they pretend to care about for political expedience. Governor Northam, the guy who was wearing blackface in the photo, but he couldn't remember if he was in the Klan robe or if he was the blackface guy or how many times he did it, and he lied about it. That guy is the governor of a state where right now you have Democrats in control of both parts of the state legislature. And so he was very necessary for the plan of trying to push very aggressive, progressive policies in a state where there's certainly a large contingent of Republicans, conservatives, who are not on board for this at all, and they just don't care. Democrats have now taken it, and it's part of this, I think, is a reflection also of the polarized era we are in when it comes to Trump. Democrats have taken an attitude in these states of, we're just going to do as much as we can, as fast as we can, when we have power, irrespective even really of the possible long-term political risks. And that is where we get to this plan in Virginia, which I've mentioned it a couple times in the show. We haven't gotten into all that much detail about it, but there is this plan in Virginia to ban semi-automatic rifles that are deemed assault rifles. And you may have a situation where, it depends on how this is enforced, but you may have a situation where you have, law enforcement going to people's homes, and under the law, if it's banned, it's banned. If it's illegal, it's illegal. And now people are going to be arrested in the state of Virginia. This isn't Massachusetts or California or some of these places that you would expect. Might be arrested for having a semi-automatic rifle that has certain cosmetic characteristics that liberals find scary. That's what we're heading for. And that also then brings me to sanctuary jurisdictions. All right, so what is a sanctuary jurisdiction in the context of you have this Democrat control of both parts of the legislature for Virginia, and you have a governor. And remember, they thought maybe for a while, okay, we're going to push the governor out. But then you had, I think, Justin Fairfax just below the governor, who was accused by two different women of sexual assault. And so that then all of a sudden, and this all happened roughly at the same time. And then if he also stepped down or couldn't take over the governor's role for Northam, you had Mark Herring, who had his own blackface issue in his past, and he initially had called for Northam to step down. So you could have had, 1, 2, 3, the top three of the state of Virginia on the executive branch side effectively stepped down or pushed out or gone, whatever, resign. So that's why they're like, all right, we're just going to keep Northam. You got Northam still in place. Remember, Northam's the guy who not only had the blackface situation in his past, but also talked far too openly and honestly, I think is what you'd have to say, about how, if a child of an abortion was born alive, you'd want to be nice to it and comfort it before you kill it. This is what he said. He said it on radio. You can all hear it for yourself. Democrats pretend that this is scaremongering or this isn't a real thing. Or the guy said it. He meant what he said. He hasn't. And also, no one has ever said that that's not the reality of the law in Virginia. And Democrats are trying to make that now. They're trying to enshrine that as the law at the state level. And then that brings me to this gun issue and the notion of sanctuary jurisdictions. Now, here's where the standard set by liberals, and it's really a standard of we have no standards other than we want power, we will achieve power, we will do what is necessary. The standard set by liberals here is more or less being replicated by Republicans. Liberals do it with immigration. They've just decided, on their own for whatever reason that they are in a position to not enforce immigration law, right? Sanctuary cities, as you know, and there's hundreds and hundreds of them across the country. And what they're saying is that state and local law enforcement will not be a part of federal law that mandates that you can't be in the country illegally, and that has, of course, other provisions that come into play as well. They will not be a part of it, and they will, in fact, do what they can to make it harder. They will not extend courtesy, assistance to federal law enforcement, immigration and customs officers. They will not honor detainer requests. So when someone's already in prison who's an illegal alien in sanctuary jurisdictions, they will not hold them until ICE can show up and take custody of them. They won't even do that. They will not even notify, in some cases, they have an illegal alien in custody. And there's the fight underway right now. This administration, the Trump administration, has been waging this battle, trying to say, "Hey, hold on a second. You can't just do this. You can't just pretend that the law isn't the law, and that law enforcement, even at the state and local level, has no role to play in assisting the federal government." Of course, the states, the Democrats, have now all of a sudden established or have discovered states' rights, which, as we know, has a very negative connotation in many contexts for other reasons. But Democrats have established or have figured out that there are states' rights, such as, in this case, would make it impossible or not a legal duty for them to do what federal law enforcement wants them to do. Okay, now let's get back to the sanctuary gun situation here. What that is that you have people sheriffs in certain towns, cities of Virginia, who have already said, look, we're not going to do this thing that you want us to do where we're going to start arresting people and enforcing this law against assault rifles. We're just not going to do it, which is going to be very interesting. Now, that is, keep in mind, it's a little different than sanctuary cities. In sanctuary cities, it's state and local law enforcement saying we will not assist or in any way enforce federal immigration law. Now you have people at the state level who are law enforcement officers paid by the state, working for the state, who are saying, sorry, not going to do it. This is nullification of the people in charge, nullification of laws of the people in charge of enforcing the laws. Now, I understand why they would do this, because it's outrageous that the Virginia state legislature, in this sort of progressive frenzy, wants to ban assault. I'm sure there are other things they're planning on doing too in the realm of gun control. There's more specifics that they're going to try to throw in the mix here and do other things that would be particularly onerous for gun owners. Because remember, much of the gun control agenda is really about agitating and otherizing people who believe in the Second Amendment and who own guns. Much of what they are really trying to accomplish with some of this legislation is just to thumb their nose at, to spit in the faces of people who are their political opponents, who tend to be Second Amendment supporters. But what happens, my friends, what happens when you have a circumstance where now Democrats decide that certain state laws will just not be enforced? Now, the drug thing, by the way, is another situation, but the federal government has kind of said, okay. But we have a lot of laws in this country right now that you start to say, what exactly is the law? Where does the law stop and start? You've got immigration law that is not enforced by state and local governments and sanctuary jurisdictions, and that the federal government seems unable to enforce. And when you're unable to enforce a law, there's certainly an argument to be made that it has ceased to be a law. So the federal government has fallen down on the job in this regard. So then you have to ask, okay, well, where else do we have laws that are not being treated as law? Look, And some of you get very mad at me on this one, and I understand. I know that there are very strong feelings around marijuana legalization and whether it's a good thing or a bad thing. I mean, the states that have made it de facto legal, although it's not legal. I mean, the federal government still has, under the Controlled Substances Act, under the first section of it, right? Schedule 1, controlled substances, marijuana is still on there. So it's still very much illegal, but states are allowed. But you see, I understand that it starts to get a little confusing. You're in this tangle of all these different laws, but you can understand how anybody looking at this would say, okay, so is the law just no longer a law when some people decide that it doesn't count anymore? Don't we have legislatures that are supposed to repeal things, amend things, change things? Is this just turning into, because what really separates America from a lot of other countries that have, a lot of natural resources, good weather, what exactly separates us from places? What separates us from most of Latin America, for example? That's a good place to start. What separates America from Latin America? Well, we have rule of law. And anybody who spent any time in Mexico or a whole bunch of other countries in Central and South America would tell you very assuredly that rule of law in those countries is kind of a non-existent or barely existent. It's one of the most important things that separates us from those countries, and it contributes to our security, our prosperity, our freedom. Rule of law is very much about freedom. If you understand what the laws are in a country, you can operate accordingly, and you can have an expectation that your freedom will be respected, and the state will protect your freedoms because you know what those laws are. When it's just a kind of sometimes yes, sometimes no, how can you even make a real determination about that? So while I understand the impulse from look, the other part of it is it's not even necessarily nullification of laws for sheriffs. Then it just turns into a form of prosecutorial discretion, which all law enforcement has. If a cop on the scene thinks, if you were speeding, but a cop thinks that, you're actually trying to get your wife to the hospital, he's completely within his rights to say, I'm going to give you a warning, you're welcome to go. Right? I mean, can a sheriff just say, hey, I saw you at the range with, if this sheriff pulls up the range to do his own target practice, well, I'm sure he has his own range. You get what I'm saying? You see somebody in Virginia with this law in effect now, banning assault rifles, assuming, but they're trying to do this in the next 60 days, so it hasn't happened quite yet. That's why I can't give you that many specifics on exactly what's going on here. But if a sheriff sees somebody, can you just say, hey, buddy, be careful with that because, it's technically illegal, but, take it home with you. Don't worry about it. Yeah, of course. So is that a dangerous nullification? Well, no, it's not. But we need to understand here that you have a Democrat impulse in a state where there are a lot of people that very much disagree with what they're trying to accomplish here. There's a Democrat impulse to make criminals of Republicans, to criminalize their Second Amendment rights, and to institutionalize as much as possible the furthest left parts of their agenda. And this is resulting in a state-by-state polarization where there's, I keep talking about the eradication of good faith in the era of Trump in our politics. I really mean it. It's a real thing. You can't trust that your fellow Americans who are liberals or who are Democrats are willing to defend your free speech rights anymore. Because there's a really large movement within the left. I would say it's the dominant force in Democrat politics today to say, no, sorry, certain things you can't, certain things are too mean. You're not allowed to say them. Certain things are too controversial. You're not allowed to say them. In the Second Amendment, what do you, if the Bloombergs of the world got their way, I mean, Bloomberg is very opposed to guns. If they got their way, what would you be allowed? You'd be allowed to maybe get a special permit to have a double-barreled shotgun that you could use to go, sporting clay shooting, go trap shooting sometime. That's the full extent. I mean, what would your Second Amendment rights really be? Oh yeah, you can defend your home with a double-barreled shotgun, so that's all you need. This is taking us down to a scary place. What you're seeing in Virginia, if this is a harbinger of things to come in other purple states across the country where Democrats have legislative control for a period of time. It's one thing to pass a law that says the tax rate The state tax is 7%. No, it's actually 9% or it's 8%. Okay, I mean, you could switch that back and forth, but you're going to start going door to door and sending law enforcement to go arrest people for this? And if you're not going to do that, why would you ban assault rifles? What does that mean? You're just going to ban new sale of assault rifles? There are, I'm sure, a few million assault rifles currently in circulation in Virginia. No one even really knows the number. So you're just going to make sure that and you're still going to have legal sale of them in other states. So if possession of them is not illegal and you're just going to ban new sales, you're just making it a lot more expensive for people to get an AR in Virginia. So if you're going to really try to get rid of them, you're going to have to arrest people for them. You have to criminalize them. Are Democrats at the state legislature of Virginia willing to do that in this crazy period we're in? It seems the answer is yes. It's very troubling. It should put everybody on edge.
During the run-up to the passage of Obamacare, President Obama promised my father that if he likes his plan, he can keep his plan, and that his insurance will be cheaper. After passage, his plan was no longer allowed, and his insurance costs doubled. Since you supported the plan, were you lying to my dad, or did you not understand the bill you supported?
Lion, dog face, pony shoulder. No, look, there's two ways people know when something is important. One, when it's so clear when it's passed that everybody understands it, and no one did understand Obamacare, including the way it was rolled out, and the gentleman's right. He said you could keep your doctor if you wanted to, and you couldn't keep your doctor if you wanted to necessarily. He's dead right about that.
Joe Biden makes these two admissions here, and it's all you really have to know about the Democrats today is that this is their best. This is the guy that they're putting up to set everything right and make everything great in this country. I mean, Joe Biden's a buffoon. But he just kind of blithely, insouciantly, I don't know if that's really a word, but in an insouciant manner, it's a fancy French word for like cool as a cucumber, says that nobody understood Obamacare when it was rolled out, and you couldn't keep your plan. And I just want to point out that I was saying that at the time. Conservatives really across the board were saying this at the time, and what we were saying was absolutely true. And yet, Democrats shouted us down, demagogued the issue, rammed it through, and still pretend like Obamacare was great. And Obamacare is effectively an expansion of Medicare. I'm sorry, an expansion of Medicaid, healthcare welfare, in a whole bunch of states, which adds dramatically to the deficit, but that's what it is. And also then does a little bit of shifting where some people get a little bit of subsidy to have kind of, not so great insurance, and other people don't get subsidies, pay more than they should, and are strained in order to try to pay the insurance. And this is what this did. We had this huge fight. Democrats just did everything, went to the mat, used reconciliation, kind of a budgetary maneuver that's not supposed to be meant for major legislation to get the last piece of Obamacare, last parts of Obamacare through. They used budget reconciliation, and all for what exactly? I mean, now here we are, right? It's been 3 years since the Obama administration was in power, and we're talking about healthcare. Now we got a whole new healthcare thing. You would think that maybe there could be some humility from the central planners as a result of this. Maybe they would take a moment to think, hold on a second. We thought we were these geniuses last time. They're going to figure this all out, and we completely messed the whole thing up. Maybe this time around, we should have a little bit more of a collaborative approach with the people that have real concerns about this and try to make things better. You'd think that the fact that Joe Biden has to say you couldn't keep your plan even though we said you could keep your plan, that's a big deal because that was a huge part of getting the buy-in, and it was never a particularly strong buy-in, but getting the buy-in of the American people. They figure, okay, this won't affect me that much in the individual market. I can keep my plan if I like my plan. And it turned out it was a big lie. Here's the problem I have with I got a lot of problems with this, but here's one of the big problems I have, folks. Democrats never learn the lesson. They never learn the lesson. They refuse to accept that we've run this experiment where they just did exactly what they wanted to do. It was all Democrats, not a single Republican vote. Did exactly what they wanted to do. They lied about what they were doing in order to get it done. Now here we are, you have Democrats running. What's their primary rallying cry against Trump as a policy matter other than Trump is Hitler? They want Medicare for all, or some, vast expansion of Medicare, or, some enormous add-on to Obamacare that would be maybe a public option. They never figure out that we've already seen they don't have the ability to do what they think they can. They will mess things up. They will make your health care worse. They will make it more expensive. Guaranteed. And yet they never step back and say, hold on a second, maybe we should learn a lesson from how we've already messed this thing up.